Welcome in, everybody. My name is Sarah, and I am your living room librarian. How do we like this intro? Is it good? Do we think it's nice? I think so. I am so excited to be making the transition into making long form content. I have been making short form for a while, but I've been really wanting to make this leap, and I intended to do it at the beginning of the year, and then I didn't, and now I am. I figured a good place to start would be to talk about the 10 books that shaped me as a reader. So I'm going to divide these up into 3 sections, the first being me as a young reader, me as an academic reader, and then me as an adult reader. So let's get into it. The first book in the young reader section is The Van Gogh Cafe by Cynthia Rylant. This is a magical realism book. It reminds me of Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I feel like this is that book, but for kids. I remember reading this a few times, probably more than a few times growing up. And every time I read it, I really loved it. It was very special to me. The book itself is a series of vignettes, and it all focuses around this little girl named Clara and her father, and they own and operate the Van Gogh Cafe. It has all these different stories of people who come in, and they're all kind of tinged with magic, and they are just really feel good, kind of like a cozy magical feel to all of the stories. This is a book that I reread recently as well, and I feel like I got even more from it as an adult than I did as a kid. I loved it then, but honestly, going back and reading it now, and I feel like this is true for most books that are really resonant as a child, if you go back and read them as an adult, it's just an extra special experience. I would recommend this to all levels of readers. I think it'd be a great thing to read if you have kids, to read aloud with them, but it deals with some pretty intense and complicated themes, even for a middle grade book, such as grief and change and falling in love and just making big life decisions, rolling with big life changes that can be very disorienting. Bonus point, there's a queer love story in this book, and this came out in the early 2000s, and there is a very poignantly sad little queer love story vignette, and I didn't really clock that at the time, and then when I reread it, I was like, you know what? Hell yeah. Cynthia Rylant has written many wonderful books. Some other ones from my childhood that meant a lot to me include The Bookshop Dog, The Cookie Store Cat, and a very important book called Dog Heaven that kind of helps people process, children especially, the loss of their first pet. It's a book that I and my family members have gifted to people when they go through that. And all of her stuff is just really wholesome. It feels good, and they have great messages sprinkled in. So yeah, very much a book that shaped me. The second book in my young reader section is The Life of Pi by Yann Martel. So this is another magical realism story, but more than that, it's an action adventure survival story. It centers around Pi Patel, who is the son of a zookeeper, and when him and his family get on a ship to relocate with their entire zoo, the ship sinks. Pi ends up stranded on a very small boat with a few animals, most notably a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. The tiger ends up dispatching the other animals until it is just him and this tiger. They are shipwrecked for 227 days. And this mostly charts that shipwreck with some flashbacks and getting some background on Pi as a 16-year-old boy. This was a book that I feel really challenged me as a young reader, and there was a lot that I found very interesting about it. One of the most interesting things, I think, is that notably Pi, one of the things about him is that he studies and practices multiple religions. So he studies Hinduism, which is his native religion, but also Christianity and Islam. And I remember just thinking that was very cool because he found things that were meaningful in all 3 of them. So obviously there's a big man versus nature theme in this, but also dealing with grief and, again, dealing with love and family, survival, change, how you navigate that change, how you survive change. And I think more than anything, it feels like it is a story that is about man and nature and how man has kind of, not even, I don't know that it's inherent, but it is very much pushed upon us to like dominate and tame nature. And this book felt like it was kind of a rebuke to that. It has this message that we only succeed if we live in tandem with nature, if we end up not trying to dominate it, not trying to conquer it, but we live in the world, within the world, and we are aware of our impact on the natural world. That was like a big brain moment for me as a young reader. And I have not reread this since, but I think I would really like to. I actually only acquired this copy relatively recently. It was at like a library sale, and I think I got it for $2, but I saw it and I was just like, oh my God, I've been wanting to have a copy of this again. So my original copy was extremely beat up and very much falling apart at the seams, so it's nice to have a new-ish edition. So that's The Life of Pi. The third and last book from my Young Reader series, I actually don't own a physical copy yet, but I would like to, is The Looking Glass Wars by Frank Bedor. It is actually a series, and I read the first two in this series in my, I believe it was my 7th grade language arts class. So my 7th grade English class, and it was in like the communal library of my teacher, who was one of my favorite teachers ever. I actually am friends with her on Goodreads now, and whenever she likes one of my book reviews, I get really excited about it. I like totally have a bit of a fangirl moment over my former teacher, so shout out to you, Miss Silver. The Looking Glass Wars is a retelling, and it's a fantasy retelling of Alice in Wonderland, and it's a set partially in Victorian London. It begins with Alice, spelled A-L-Y-S-S, heart, escaping from Wonderland to escape her murderous Aunt Red, and she somehow finds her way into Victorian-era London, where she ends up meeting Lewis Carroll, who is a character in the book. I just thought that was like so funny and quirky and fun. Like, wow, the author is in this book. But she meets Lewis Carroll, and he ends up transcribing her story, and that becomes Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. But he like gets it all wrong, and it's like a whole mess. It's the first in a trilogy. I read the first two. I remember loving them and being like so excited for the third one to come out, and then I completely forgot that this series existed. I never finished it. The third book did come out, and I think there might even be some like spin-off books, but I very much need to finish the trilogy because I remember it ended on quite the cliffhanger, and I just let that rock for, I don't know, a decade and a half. I really do need to find out what happens. This was very much indicative of me now loving retellings. I'm a big fan of retellings of fairy tales, of mythologies. I love them so much, I wrote one. Maybe I'll talk about that at some point soon. Wink wonk. I remember really loving Alice in particular. She's a very like scrappy heroine, and I love a scrappy heroine. It was very interesting to have her be in Victorian London. There is like a bit of a love story, I believe, if I remember correctly, like between her and her bodyguard. I remember Aunt Red was terrifying. It was very much just like, oh, this is a cool way to frame a classic story and to just turn it on its head and make it something new and different. And that's really what I love the most about retellings, is how they can be reshaped and reformed and made popular and appealing to modern audiences. All these books, as I was thinking about them and reviewing their impact on me, they all kind of share quite a bit. And I think one of the biggest things that I can see now is that all three of them deal with change. Some of them are, you know, it's smaller, kind of more in the mundane day-to-day things. Some of them are quite big, quite literally life or death changes, or, you know, fantastical life changes. But all of them kind of revolve around how does one deal with growing up and having your life shift and change as you shift and change, as you grow. How do you deal with that? And as a kid with, at that time, an undiagnosed anxiety disorder, I feel like that really made sense for me to seek out literature where the protagonists were dealing with these really intense, big moments, and that they would ultimately land on their feet, or they would figure out a new way to come at a problem that they hadn't thought of before, but that everything was okay in the end, that they were able to conquer the big scary changes. And I think that was very comforting for me at that time. Also, all three of those deal with kind of magical elements. All of them deal with a degree of magic and fantasy that very much reflects me as an adult reader. I love fantasy, I write fantasy, and that very much makes sense to me. Moving on to the second section, academic reading. reading? What were the books that challenged me, shaped me, forced me to grow as a reader and a consumer of literature as a teenager? The first in my academic reader section is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. If you know me, I have talked about this book to you. Like, this is a very, very formative book for me. Also kind of magical realism, but this is like the story that we read in freshman year, and it was the one that we were like, okay, this is the hero's journey. Like, this is very much a distilled, very easily traceable and followable hero's journey story. It follows in particular Santiago, who is a shepherd, and basically he finds himself embarking on this very epic, life-changing quest that he goes on, and it follows him through that entire time, through the highs and the lows, the failures and the wins, and it just kind of charts his course through that. And it is also, I feel like, specifically, it feels like the hero's journey for an artist. And maybe this is just because I am an artist, but this feels like so much of this applies to like an artistic or creative lifestyle, or the way that you like approach problems in one's life. So I remember that just like really resonated with me at the time. And as I have reread it, and I have reread it multiple times, in particular when I'm going through big life changes or transitional periods in my life, I just think that this is a really good like touchstone, and I can come back to it. I take what I need from it. Sometimes I don't even finish it all the way. Actually, it's still marked. I read it like halfway, and then I was like, actually, I think that's all I need right now. So apparently I left off on page 105 last time I read this, so maybe next time I'll read the whole thing. One of the most compelling pieces of the story is the concept of beginner's luck. In the very beginning, when Santiago, agrees to go on this quest, he has like a big win. He has something go really well for him, and a like mentor figure in the story basically tells him that's beginner's luck. You're going to have a really easy time at the very beginning, and then things are going to get really hard. I feel like as an artist, I can relate to that. The times when I have embarked on something and I've been like, wow, this is really easy. Everything's kind of falling into place. And then inevitably things change and things get hard and it's difficult to move through. But that concept has really stuck with me of just like, if you keep pushing through, something will give, something is going to change, or you will change and you will change your path. Just that like the struggle is normal. And like, even if you're really like, okay, I had a really good success at the first turn of something going wrong, it's not like, well, I'm a failure. It's just part of the journey. And that's just something that I've reminded myself of, and that has kept me going through difficult times. Another one of the core aspects of the story that I love is the love story in it. It is a deeply romantic pairing between the two of them. They are immediately acknowledging the importance that they have to each other, and it is like not questioned, and they're even separated, and they have separate trials and things that they go through, and it's just like, this is real. What is happening between us, the love that we have, the partnership that we have, it's not in question. It is going to last, and it is meant to be. And I just love that. I'm a very romantic person. That's how I feel about my husband and the way that our life has taken shape together. We've been through many struggles and hurdles. Our love, our relationship has been the thing that has been solid no matter what, and has kept me grounded. So I remember being like, I want a love like that. And I have one. So that's just me bragging about my husband. Sorry, gross, cringe. I just knew that this was going to be something that I carried with me forever. I have multiple copies of it, and I will probably get more, even though I shouldn't, because that's financially irresponsible. The second book in my academic reader section is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is a book about fascism. Don't know why that's relevant in any way. The book centers around Guy Montag, who in this kind of alternate future on Earth, the firemen are not the people who put out the fires. They are the people who start fires. And specifically, they burn books and the homes in which those books are kept. Censorship. Fun stuff. He has a very impactful meeting with one of his neighbors, and then that kind of sends him on the path to begin to question pretty much everything that he thinks he knows about life and about his choices and what he has done, what he continues to do, and what will he not put up with anymore. It's a book that's about deprogramming, about opening your eyes and being willing to ask questions about things, even when it may be easier or safer to not do that. This book Specifically, I remember this was the first thing that I was assigned my freshman year. And I remember reading it on a camping trip in like August going into my freshman year. And I remember sitting and reading it and having the very distinct thought that like, I have never read something like this before. I have not read something that has challenged me like this and challenged the way that I potentially walk through my life and walk through the world as this book did. Admittedly, there were definitely things that very much went over my head. I was 14, you know? There's only so much that you can really fully absorb. But I reread this a couple years ago as part of a like back to school reading challenge that I set for myself. It was very much an illuminating experience of like, oh yeah, this is as good as I remember it being, but also it's even better and it's even more impactful and more of a gut punch given where we are right now in the world, how things are going. Very much a book that I would recommend anyone to read right now in particular. Yeah, you should read this. I see my interest back then very much as a reflection of some of my favorite authors now and the themes that they dig into in their works, like R.F. Kuang and Samantha Shannon. They very much interrogate like systems of power imbalances in various institutions, racism, misogyny, like all the things that are bad, those come up in here. And the fact that that was interesting to me, and I was like, I think maybe I should be paying attention to that, very much reflects my reading tastes now as an adult. Little Sarah was already getting the gears turning on like, you know, being a socially aware person. And the last from my academic reader section is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, my beloved. Just one of the best. This is Gothic literature. I feel like this makes so much sense for me. The fact that this was so impactful back then, it very much makes sense as to the reader that I am now. Despite the fact that this is like pretty spooky. Not the whole time, but if you know, like the things that are spooky in this book, they're pretty spooky. And I was very much a scaredy cat growing up. I still am, but I engage with horror media now in a way that kind of helps me face my fears. Yeah, it's become one of my favorite genres. And so that makes sense for me here. Like a nice Gothic literature that is going to just give me just the right amount of the creeps. Jane Eyre, if you are not familiar, it tells the first person account of Jane Eyre, the protagonist, and it follows her pretty much from her being orphaned as a child all the way through like her time at a boarding school. She becomes a governess ultimately for the very mysterious Mr. Rochester, and it chronicles her time there and what happens. Jane is like one of my absolute favorite characters ever. I remember even reading it as a senior in high school, just feeling like she was so real and she was so human. And I loved how she was able to like own up to her mistakes and her own vices. And I found her to be incredibly brave and honest and really principled, but at the same time would like acknowledge when she was vain, when she got jealous, when she was spiteful and angry. I just thought that was very refreshing to have a female main character in particular just be like, yeah, I'm not perfect all the time. And sometimes I do things that I regret and it's okay. I will move on. I will persist. That very much like resonated at that time. That hit hard. I also have a particular moment in this book, which like spoilers, I guess, for like a book from like literally the 1800s or whatever. There's a moment early on in the book where Jane stands up to her abusive aunt, and it is like one of the best verbal set downs I've still ever read. And I remember like reading that and I was just like, I will never be the same after this. Like this has changed me and impacted me on like a molecular level to just have this tiny girl tell her horrible aunt exactly how horrible she is and not pull her punches. And I was just like, you know what? Hell yeah. That rocks, actually. Getting now to Mr. Rochester, the moody man blueprint. At the time, I remember like thinking he was mysterious and like handsome and cool and whatever, but I reread this like a couple years ago again for that academic back to school reading, and he is like straight up goofy at times. Like he does some things that are so silly. He dresses up as like a palm reader just so he can like ask Jane if she likes him, if so he can just like hold her hand and like trace the lines on her palm and like pretend to read it just so he could like be near her. And I just think that's so silly. That's such a goofy thing to do for this guy who was supposed to be so like mysterious and dark and handsome, but he was just like a silly guy who had a crush and he just wanted to talk to his crush and like hold her hand. And I just thought that was kind of delightful. There are aspects of the pairing that are flawed, but I do think that ultimately Jane and Rochester are a very good pair. I think they balance each other well. They challenge each other. And I think when they do end up together, because it is quite a long road and lots of things happen, it feels earned. And I was rooting for them even on the second reread. More than that, honestly though, like I was just rooting for Jane to be happy. She could have picked anything and I would have been like, you know what? Yeah, but I'm Team Jane more than anything else. So the fact that she ended up with him, I was like, that's great, girl. You do that. Very much an influential book for me in my tastes, and it makes sense that this has remained one of my favorite books ever of all time. So what do all these books have in common? They all very much challenged me as a reader, and they forced me to look at reading in a different way and look at literature in a different way and to expand what I thought I would like and what I thought was appealing to me. And all three of those have very much impacted me as a person, not just as a reader. They're books that I could reread many, many times over. I would recommend them to anyone who wants to listen to me. These very much make sense for being like my academic touchstone books. And now we have arrived to my reading reemergence as an adult. I got real burnt out post-college and I didn't read for a while, and then I got back into it and I got really into it, hence why I even have this channel now. These 4 books that I am going to be talking about are very much indicative of the 4 main genres that I love the most to interact with, and they are all books that have touched me and impacted me deeply as a person and a reader. Number 1 for this section, and honestly number 1 in my heart, I can't say that, I have so many number 1s, but one of the number 1s in my heart is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a contemporary romance, kind of hinging a little bit onto like women's fiction. It is a book about writing, about 2 writers, January and Gus, who are neighbors for the summer, living along Lake Michigan, and they're both kind of stuck. They're having writer's block, and they challenge each other to write a book in the other author's preferred genre. So January, who is a romance author, is going to try to write like a very serious literary fiction novel, TM. And Gus is going to write a bona fide romance novel when everything that he's done is very much like the great American novel, lit fic, straight up. This is a book that made me just feel giddy. I didn't know that books could make me feel this way. I remember reading it and just kind of being like, is this allowed? Is this allowed? Am I allowed to feel all these things while I'm reading this? As is indicative of my earlier books, like a lot of those had like love story side plots or like love story elements. I was not like a romance reader growing up. I didn't really have any access to that. I didn't have interest in it. So this was like one of the first actual bona fide romance books that I read. And I was just like, I felt like a whole new world was opening up to me. Romance is now my most read genre. It is like my comfort genre. It's my palate cleanser genre. When I am going between other things, I can always go back to romance. And that is a big part because of this book. One thing that I love about this is the dialogue. It feels so fresh and alive, and it makes sense that like all of her books are being optioned for being turned into movies and TV shows and all that stuff, is that all of her dialogue is so snappy and it feels so real without being trite or like too on the nose or too like, you know, au courant with lingo and slang and all that stuff. It just feels like 2 people or more talking. It feels like you are just in the room with people having real conversations, and that is very hard to do. That is very, very difficult, and I think she does that perfectly. I love January and Gus. They are one of my favorite couples. I'm really drawn to literary couples that are really good matches for each other, whether that means they're like very similar or they're very different, but they work together and they function very well as individuals, and they help each other as individuals, but also as a unit and as a couple. And I feel like Gus and January are very much that to me. Very much mom and dad. Very much they will be together forever for the rest of their lives. Amen. So this was just like the book that made me fall in love. And I love love. I love reading about love. And I will always have a very special place in my heart for Beach Read. Next on my adult reader docket, in a very much 180, very different vibe, is the Poppy War, or the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. This is like as different as you could get from Beach Read, I feel like. The Poppy War trilogy is a high fantasy, military fantasy kind of meeting historical fiction. The events in the book are based off of 20th century Chinese history. This is centered around Rin, the main character, who is a war orphan. She basically ends up somehow miraculously acing this aptitude test that is given to all the children in the empire to see who can go to their like very competitive, very intense military schools. And Rin ends up getting into like the most elite, the most intense one. And from there, we follow Rin over 3 books. I don't want to say much more about it, but I will say, do not let anyone sell this to you as like academic rivals to lovers, or like this is like dark academia. Like this is war. This is a military fantasy. This is brutal. This is a really intense series. I don't want anyone going into that thinking like this is gonna be like a fun time. It's not fun. It's not fun. I love it. It's not fun. This is the series that very much got me back into fantasy. And again, this was a series that challenged me, but had me by the throat. Like I tore through these books in I think maybe a month, and they're big books, they're chunky. And this was still like pretty early on in my like reading reemergence. So this was the first big fantasy world that I immersed myself in. You know, it was amazing and I loved it. R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite authors. I am an R.F. Kuang apologist. That's just me. That's me, and I will ride that train till I die. It interrogates a lot of uncomfortable aspects of war and power, academia. Another very prevalent theme in all of R.F. Kuang's work, or at least most of it, is like the dynamic between an academic superior and like a student who is under that person, and just like the striving for academic validation, particularly between like a male teacher and a female student. And I feel like that is something that a lot of people can relate to. I think the way that she uncovers things and really digs in deep and makes you look at really ugly, uncomfortable things, to me, I think it's masterful and extremely compelling and uncomfortable in all the best ways. So that book definitely deals with that. Without getting into spoiler territory, there is a particular character that his journey and his way that he accesses his power is so haunting to me. And I think about it like every couple of weeks. And it's just like, it makes me so sad and makes me so like, and that's pretty much it. It very much investigates like the cost of power, psychologically, physically, emotionally, mentally, and just like what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you willing to cede in order to gain power? And yeah, it's awful, but also really good. The series as a whole, highly recommend, but yeah, check your content warnings, check your trigger warnings, and if you are good with it, I think you will have not a good time, but you will have a time and it will be good. You know? The third in my reading reemergence, reading as an adult section is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I was never a big horror person. Again, bona fide scaredy-cat, scared of so many things. And as I have gotten into horror literature as an adult, I really think it has been a very like healing experience. As like an anxious child on the inside, this has been very, very exciting for me. And I'm like proud of myself every time I finish a horror book. But this was the one that really kicked it off. It's a story that follows 4 men, and essentially they make a very bad decision. And many years later, it comes back to haunt them, literally. And that's all I'm gonna say about it. This was a book that I picked up and I remember being scared to read it. I'd heard good things about it. I hadn't read anything from this author yet. And then he would later go on to become one of my favorite authors. But this was a book that I was like, there's a very good chance that I'm not gonna make it through this. And instead, I tore through it in like 2 days. I remember where I was when I was reading it. That's very common. If a book really impacts me, I remember like where I am in the world, where I'm reading it. I remember sitting on my parents-in-law's couch and it was snowing outside and I was reading this and I was just like, I can't believe I'm reading this right now, but I am in, I'm locked in. Big themes are like regret, vengeance, how that can really warp you, change you, eat you alive. Just, there's a lot of dark stuff in it. Again, check your content warnings, check your trigger warnings, particularly if you're not good with like animal horror. This is like, that's a huge part of this book. I didn't think I was okay with that, but all of it was so motivated and it all made sense. So I was okay. And it made sense for the journey. It made sense for what was happening in the novel and the characters involved. This is also one that I reread recently. I listened to it on audio and that was a very harrowing experience. I was listening to it as I was playing a video game and I was just like, oh man, I don't know if this was the right decision, but the audio was great. And yeah, I think this is one that I will return to every couple of years. I'm very happy I own a copy of this. And it's one that I would definitely recommend to people who are interested in the horror genre. Stephen Graham Jones is one of my favorite authors, period, and I think he's one of the best horror writers around. And last but certainly not least of my adult reader section is Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. Coming back all the way around to romance. I had bookends with that, but this is historical romance. This is the third book in a series of interconnected standalones. It's the story of Evie and Sebastian, and they are my babies. I love them so much. This is a classic kind of marriage of convenience, rake wallflower love story. Evie is trying to escape her abusive family, and she seeks out Sebastian, who is like an infamous rake, has never been tamed by any woman in all of London, and she convinces him to marry her. You need my money, I need your protection, let's do this thing, let's go to Gretna Green and get married. It is so much more than that though. Evie, like Jane, is one of my favorite protagonists, and she is so brave and she's so strong, but she's also like quite soft and awkward, and she's very aware of her not being like the stereotypical like beauty or like, you know, the smartest person. It's just like, I am who I am, and if you don't like that, then like you don't have to talk to me. And she's extremely resilient and kind and gentle, and also like really knows how to deliver a set down and call someone out, and I just love her. She is my perfect little angel baby. And Sebastian, admittedly, you kind of hate him at the beginning, but there's nothing I love more than a man who is like, I will never love, I've never felt love in my life, and you like can't make me. Over the course of a romance book, just like becoming so embarrassingly, pathetically down bad, like will do anything to just like breathe the same air as the person he loves, like put their life on the line, sell their belongings, like do anything to just be like, just love me back. And I love that. And that is very much what happens here. Sebastian and Evie also, again, like some of the other couples I've mentioned here, I feel like are a really good match. And I think they are like, to me, one of like the blueprint couples of the rake and the wallflower. That is one of my favorite dynamics. And I could do an entire video just talking about that, and honestly I probably will, don't tempt me with a good time. But they are very much like the opposites attract, and they bring out the best in each other. Sometimes they bring out the worst in each other, but they challenge each other as individuals and as a couple. They encourage each other to grow and to change and to like accept the things about themselves that maybe that they're self-conscious about, or to lean into the things that they're interested in and that they've always wanted to give attention to, but they haven't, and then the other person encourages them to. They are very much like the backbone, I think, of Lisa Kleypas's catalog, and you see them in later books that involve other couples, and when you see their children and they have their own books, like they are, again, this is like mom and dad. This is mom and dad. They are it. They are everything to me. I love them so much. They are perfect. And with that, that's all the books that made me. This was really fun. I really like talking about books. Shocker. I really like talking about the books that have really impacted me and shaped my taste. I think it all really makes sense. I had a lot of fun doing like a thesis on like, who is Sarah as a reader? But yeah, that's my first video. I did my first video on YouTube. I've been threatening to do this for so long, and now I've done it. If you like what you saw, if you want to see more, please like and subscribe. Stick around, and there's going to be more videos. I promise. I want to keep doing this. I had a good time. I will be back with more. If you have anything you'd like to see from me within reason, leave a comment. Let me know. I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope you have a great book to pick up after you turn this video off.